disability rights movement led by and for Nigeria's 28.5 million persons with disabilities in Nigeria. The goal of the campaign is to increase the participation of persons with disabilities in Nigeria's political and electoral processes by reducing physical barriers and stigma that make it difficult or impossible for persons with disabilities to participate in elections. To better understand the challenges persons with disabilities face, the Access Nigeria campaign collected data through Nigeria's first ever polling unit accessibility audit. This historical audit, conducted during the 2016 governorship election in Edo and Ondo State, exposed the widespread barriers experienced by persons with disabilities on election day. Topping the list of the challenges includes lack of available election materials in usable formats for people with disabilities, and polling units without ramps or with physical barriers to entry, with reports showing that 65% of the polling units in Edo and 77% of the PU in Ondo are located in places that were inaccessible for persons with disabilities. Findings from the 2016 Edo and Ondo State audit provided crucial data for advocacy to the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, resulting in changes to the ways elections are run, and that is already impacting the lives of people with disabilities across the nation.
For the governorship election in KOGI State, the Access Nigeria campaign deployed a sample-based election observation methodology to measure INEC's compliance with Section 56(1) and 2 of the Electoral Act 2010 as amended, and Article 9 and 29 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which legally guarantees the rights of PWDs to participate in political and public life. This accessibility audit represents the largest polling unit audit conducted by persons with disabilities observers in Nigeria's history. On November 16, 200 carefully selected, trained and accredited PWD observers documented physical barriers, physical accessibility of polling units for PWD voters, access to election day materials, and the participation of PWDs in election day processes. Observers deployed to the 200 polling units covering KOGI East 95 polling units, KOGI Central 61 polling unit, and KOGI West 44 polling units, and answered 31 questions on the election day checklist before sending a total of 5 coded text messages to the Access Nigeria database system. Throughout the course of the observation, Access Nigeria observers sent approximately 1,000 text messages, equating to 6,200 individual pieces of data. By utilizing PWDs as observers, the audit was conducted through a disability lens, which provides credibility for the data collected. Accessibility audit findings. From the sampled 200 polling units, Access Nigeria observers successfully sent reports from 199 polling units, representing a 98% response rate. The findings outlined below accurately capture accessibility, voting, accessible voting, and lack of thereof, and availability of election day materials in accessible formats for voters with disabilities in KOGI State. Access to polling units. Findings show that 55% of polling units in KOGI State were located in public spaces, while 45% were located in public buildings. Of those polling units, including schools, bus stops, market, court, town hall, health centers, etc., 54% were found to be inaccessible for voters with disabilities. Lack of accessible spaces and buildings have larger implications beyond elections. For example, If schools are not accessible for voters, then they are not accessible for students or pupils with disabilities. Observers reported that 51% of routes leading to the polling unit were inaccessible due to uneven surfaces. Ramps and handrails were not available for use by voters with disabilities at 90% of the routes to sample polling units. These overall accessibility challenges raises the larger question on inclusivity or inclusive infrastructure development. On the polling unit layout, at 47% of the observed polling units, reports show that it was difficult for voters with disabilities to enter the polling units and vote. Similarly, at 48% of polling units, the layout was difficult for voters with disabilities to participate in accreditation and voting. Observers reported that 93% of sample polling units did not include ramps and handrails for use by voters with disabilities. Now, to polling unit materials on election day. At 50% of sampled polling units, the height of the ballot box was not suitable for voters with disabilities, particularly for those who use wheelchairs. Form EC40H was available at 77% of sample polling units to collect data of voters with disabilities who voted on election day. Observers reported that Braille ballot guides were not deployed to 66% of sample polling units, and magnifying glasses were also not available at 82% of polling units. The INEC Form EC30 EPWD election day written instructions for the deaf were posted at 60% of sample polling units. Now, finally, on election day procedures. Voters with disabilities were recorded on INEC's Form EC40H at 57% of sample polling units. Ballot boxes at 53% of sample polling units were accessible to voters with disabilities to independently cast their ballots. And at 63% of sample polling units, voters with visible disabilities were given priority to vote upon arrival immediately at their polling units. Observers also reported that Braille ballot guides were used at 55% of the polling units where the Braille ballot guides were deployed to.
Based on the findings of the polling unit accessibility audit, the Access Nigeria Disability Votes Matter campaign makes the following recommendations to ensure voters with disabilities can continue to participate in Nigeria's political and electoral processes. Our recommendation to the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. IFA calls on INEC to relocate inaccessible polling units and create new ones that are accessible and safe to voters with disabilities. INEC should categorize the Braille ballot guide as a sensitive material to ensure timely and effective deployment of all national and state elections. INEC should immediately amend its continuous voter registration, that's the CVR forms, to include status and types of disabilities to ensure the Commission, to enable the Commission to collect data of persons with disabilities during the CVR. To complement this effort, INEC should audit the utilization of Form EC40H by presiding officers of election day to collect data of voters with disabilities. INEC should strengthen trainings of regular and ad hoc staff to effectively administer accessible election day materials and accommodations for voters with disabilities. INEC should ensure that voting cubicles are designed to enable voters with disabilities to cast their ballot with confidentiality, as well as ensure ballot boxes are placed in areas that allow voters with disabilities to vote independently. INEC should continue to engage and consult with disability community, including the Inclusive Friends Association, to identify areas to be improved for more inclusive electoral processes. INEC, the police, and other security agencies under the platform of the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, the ICCES, should develop and implement a clear plan for the protection of persons with disabilities during elections in consultation with the disability community. Our recommendation to the executive at the federal and state level. IFA calls on federal and state government to work with various agencies to ensure that public buildings are built and renovated by the 2023 deadlines to accommodate persons with disabilities in their daily life in accordance with the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act 2018. The executive at all levels should strengthen existing building codes and enforce them to guarantee accessibility for persons with disabilities during and beyond elections. Our recommendation to the National and State Assembly. The National Assembly should consider the amendment of Section 56, subsection 2 of the 2010 Electoral Act to make the provision of accessible election materials for voters with disabilities mandatory in all elections. The National Assembly should ensure that the executives implement specific sections of the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Act 2018 through effective legislative oversight. The National Assembly should also perform its oversight functions of INEC to ensure that all measures for accessibility are implemented in line with the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act.
The first election that we saw, sign language interpreters sitting side by side with the collation officer. And that actually passed the message across to voters who are hearing impaired and also other people at home. But we also have just 2 recommendations for you. The media should make deliberate efforts to conduct voter education that complements the effort of organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs, in promoting the participation of PWDs in Nigeria's electoral and political processes. Media executives should also consider disability inclusion in broadcast and news production to promote inclusive practices in Nigeria, including the consistent utilization of sign language interpretation. And to election-focused civil society organization, IFA commends the work of all organizations working towards safer, more inclusive, free and fair elections in Nigeria. IFA calls on these organizations to continue to engage with the disability community to ensure their efforts are inclusive and provide opportunities for persons with disabilities to contribute to their work, either as advisors to ensure a disability lens on their work or including PWDs as participants in activities.
It is evident that Nigerians with disability want to participate in the electoral and political process of Nigeria, as indicated by their participation as both voters and observers during the KOGI state governorship election. However, accessibility challenges, stigmas, and stereotypes continue to persist and undermine persons with disabilities' abilities to participate in electoral and political activities. While INEC has taken great strides to improve its priority voting policy and implement voting accommodations, polling unit officials consistently fail to understand the significance of inclusion or take action that promotes the participation of all groups. IFA commends INEC for its commitment and engagement to these topics, but we at the Inclusive Friends are disheartened by the lack of prioritization given to voting materials for voters with disabilities, as evident by the deployment of the Braille ballot guides to only 35% of the polling units during the KOGI state governorship election. The violence exhibited in the elections affected voters with disabilities and PWD's observers who had to flee for safety in the face of danger. Persons with disabilities are most vulnerable in these kinds of situations. Inclusive Friends calls on all stakeholders to do better in ensuring peaceful and safe elections to the benefit of Nigerians with disabilities and all voters before, during, and after Election Day. The visit by INEC National Commissioner Mohammed Haruna to the Access Nigeria Data Center and the commitment to continually engage until full inclusion is achieved is greatly appreciated. However, Inclusive Friends called on INEC to implement the above recommendations before the upcoming off-cycle election in Edo and Ondo State in 2020. IFA once again wishes to express its appreciation to INEC, to the INEC National Chairman, the National Commissioners, the Directors, the resident electoral commissioners in both states, and the desk officers for their effort. And we would like to also express our appreciation to the Joint National Association of Persons with Disabilities, the state chapters, the local government coordinators of persons with disabilities, and to all persons with disabilities who worked as election observers for this election. Thank you very much.